Okay. All right, guys, we're gonna get going so that Dave can do a little critique before his demonstration. So I'm just gonna start speaking and I hope you're listening, please. So everyone, please calm down. Thank you very much. So we have Dave Landers here. He comes from Estes Park. He's got over 30 years of wood turning experience and has, as you can see, has been doing a lot of very artistic stuff lately. He's going to be at the AAW Symposium this year and helps with the Rocky Mountain Symposium and has a big, long history of wood turning. Let's see, your shop's out in Estes Park. What else?
Estes Park, yeah,
Estes Park.
that's close enough.
And that's where you've been?
Longmont and Estes.
Cool. So I'm excited to have Dave here. I think this turned off. It is on. Okay. But I'll hand it over to him so he can do a quick little critique and then talk to us about these sliced hollow vessels that you see up here. So thank you.
All right. So I picked up a few pieces and brought them up here. And I did not bring that with me. That's all. This one was on the beginner table, and I understand that the challenge was bowl concentrating on form, and I think this one, especially for a beginner turner, has done quite well. I really like the shape. The one thing I would do with this bowl maybe would be just bring in the foot just a little bit more. Just a little bit smaller on the bottom. It would help lift it up off the table just a little bit. But otherwise, that's really nice shape. There's not a big flat spot or anything on there. Feels good to hold. I like the undercut rim because if you pick that up, you got a place to hold on to it. So nice work there. Done. Okay. Nicely done. So here's another one. And I really like this shape. Another nice form, nice curves here. Again, but with a bowl like this is not like a salad bowl you're going to pass around with tongs and stuff, right? So with the closed top, I would go with a much smaller base because it doesn't really need to be that stable on a table because of what you're going to put in it. This is going to sit in your lap with popcorn or, something like that. So I would even encourage you to, something like this, go a lot further. You could go all the way around, put just a little dimple, like the size of a quarter or a dime on the bottom, and it will sit on a table straight up. And then you tip it and it'll rock and it'll go back. It's just really cool. But that shape is really nice, and I think it'd be a little bit nicer if it were just continued all the way through that bottom. I like the pedal in the side too. I brought up this one. This looks pretty good, but if you feel this one, who did this one? There's a bump on here? Yeah. We always know that, don't we? Once you kind of find that, it's hard to get rid of it. There's a bump right here. And what that means is there's two flat spots on either side of it. And one of the tricks that I do, what I do with my stuff. I had something. There it is. One of the tricks I do when I'm trying to train my eye, because when this is sitting on the lathe, you really need to train yourself to see that curvature. You got a glue stick. I mean, there's other ways to do it. You can do it with a pencil. I like the glue stick. I can lay that down on there and I can see the gaps in there. And if it's a good curve, that glue stick will lay right flat on that piece. And so it's just a little bit of I do need to work on that, because so often you'll be working on that and you can't see it while it's spinning on the lathe. But you sand it and you finish it and you take it off and you feel it. It's like, right? So just that little extra effort. And we probably all have glue sticks, or after tonight's demo, you might have glue sticks. And just one other piece I wanted to look at. This is Larry's little piece. I like this form. This has got a really good curvature. And I want to encourage you guys to do small pieces, because the detail you have to do to get a good curve in a teeny piece will translate to the bigger pieces, because every little thing is noticeable when your bowl is only 2 inches diameter. Every little thing shows up. So Larry, you did a nice job on this one, but you know, do some small pieces, because it really helps your eye and your hand coordination. Get that. Some of you, this is a giant piece. Well, you know, you make them too small and nobody can tell. So they know that they can tell. So somebody, I don't know if you guys want to put these back on the, I stole them off the table back there. So tonight for the demo, we're just going to roll right into it. I hope some of you have come up and looked. This is what we're doing tonight. So I call these sliced holoforms in the tradition of wood turners, where this vessel, we call it a holoform because it's a form that's hollow. We're not real good marketing people, are we? So I just said, okay, I'll run with that, and this one's sliced, so guess what I call it, right? It's a sliced holoform, because I'm no good at marketing either. So what we're going to do tonight, I'm not going to turn a holoform because we want to get out of here before midnight. So I've got some already turned. We're going to start, but I'm going to show you how I lay this out, how I think about it, how to put in these peva or butterfly patches. So that works whether you're mutilating your holoforms or fixing a patch, a crack in a bowl or whatever. So a useful skill. So I'll show you how I do that. And I'll show you how I slice this. I'll talk a lot about these bandsaw jigs that I've got and why they're really useful, beyond just cutting things in half like this. So we'll get to this. I'm going to start over here at the lathe. And we will get to the jig. The jig's kind of an important thing to what I do, but I start with a holoform. And because I'm going to cut this on the bandsaw, and we're using this blade on this bandsaw is an 1/8 inch blade with very fine teeth. There's a group of you here in the Laguna area that I can't see, so you can't see me, but all right. So I start with a holoform. I'm going to slice it on the bandsaw. I can't get a blade with fine teeth like that through the whole thing. Right? You try and run a blade with, 14. The blade I use at home is 14, 18 tooth variable pitch blade. So it has between 14 and 18 teeth per inch. Really teeny teeth. There's no way you're going to get that through a 5 inch, 6 inch, 8 inch piece of wood. It's going to, if it doesn't stall, the blade's going to wander and everything. So I have to start with a holoform. So I'm only going through, a couple of pieces of maybe 3/16 inch wood. So I have to hollow the whole thing before I can do anything. So this piece is hollowed out completely. I have sanded this piece. Usually before I do this, there's a piece in the back there that you kind of can't see over there behind the others that has just been sanded to like 120. And that's what I do usually. This piece has been sanded more because I was practicing and I had a bunch of pencil line marks on here and I had to get them off. So it's been sanded a little more than I normally do. But I'll sand it down just to get rid of tool marks, make sure I've got the curvature I want, make sure I can see what's happening on the wood, right? So I don't leave it all rough or anything. I get it down to at least where I can see what the wood is doing because I care. So this piece, I'll come back there. You don't need to go over. Like this piece here, there's some figure and the grain's kind of got a little wave going on right here. I care about what that's doing in relation to this cut I've made through this piece. So I plan my cuts based on what's happening with the wood. So really boring pieces of wood don't take a lot of planning. But, when there's something interesting going on, I really care about how this cut that I'm making and these peta or butterflies that I'm putting in, how they interact with that. So, I care about seeing enough of the wood that I can tell what's going on. I don't usually sand the inside of my hollow forms, maybe just that deep. But we'll talk about that a little bit. If you'd like to do that, we're going to cut this in half and you'll have a great opportunity to sand inside. So, all right. So I start by looking at the piece of wood. I'm going to make a bunch of pencil line marks on here. I've made myself a little platform. The fact that this is, like, what, 3 inches thick is because the piece of wood I had when I was making this was like 3 inches thick. So that's, all that is. And then just a 1 inch chunk of metal will go in the, these lathes, yeah. Got to get the banjo thing right. And I've got a stop collar on here that I've set so that when I set a pencil on here, it's right at center line. And I put my live center in here and I moved this up over here and I made sure my pencil was pointed at the center of my live center here. So the pencil's right on the center line, so I can make all kinds of marks on here, perpendicular or parallel to the lathe bed. So I'll start by looking. I want to see, okay, this piece of wood, there's a nice little oval here in the grain. There's lots of squirrely stuff going on here. There's a nice big round guy here with a little accent in it and more swirly stuff. So I'm looking at those and I'm thinking, okay, when I'm slicing this, I'm cutting an arc basically. So a part of a circle, right? And so I'm cutting an arc, and when it ends up, I better just leave one of these over here. At least one. So I'm going to cut a piece of a circle, an arc, out of this. And so I thought you could move all the cameras. Okay, so yeah. So the way I'm thinking about it now in terms of laying out, I've got a low spot of this arc on either side and a high spot. And I want to think about where that goes. I want, if I make a really tight circle, I'm going to have a low spot way down here and a high spot way up here. And I think it just, that's extreme, but I think it overpowers the piece. So I kind of like a little more of a subtle little arc. And so I usually start with pencil out, and I'll mark basically the widest spot on my piece. And I'll put a line mostly all the way around. Wasn't quite round anymore, but close enough. And then I start to think about, okay, I've got this whirl right here. What if something happened like either a high spot or a low spot going through there? And what's on the opposite side of it? Oh, it's this thing, whatever that circle. So I'll look here and I'll try and find, that's nice, where the indexer will sit. And I don't, if it doesn't work out to have a nice index position on my lathe, I can move this in the chuck and kind of reorient it. Or I can use an indexing plate and get really fine adjustments here. But all I'm looking for is every 90 degrees right now, because that's where the low spots and the high spots are. So I'm going to just make a little mark there. I'm going to see, okay, that's 90 degrees from there. I'm just doing that I make a mark, and then I bring it around so it's on the top, and then I find the closest index hole to that. That's close enough. That gets you there. So now I've got marks every 90 degrees. One of them goes right through the little white, but probably just a little bit of bark from the outside of this piece. And another spot goes right through that whorl. So I like that. Now I have to, so I think what I would do with this piece, I'm gonna make a pencil mark on here. There's kind of a grain whorl like that. Can y'all see that? So my thought is that I want my slice to kind of come under that. And so it pushes that to the top part of the piece, right? And that means that on the opposite side, it's going to go under it also. And on this, it's going to go over, and here it's going to go over. So I'll do this kind of game with the pencil. And sometimes I end up with more pencil than wood on the piece by the time I've kind of figured out what I want. But so now I kind of know, like rotationally, where I want my arc to be, where I want my slice to be. So the next thing I have to figure out is what I think of as the height of this slice. So what's the distance between the low spot and the high spot? Like that. And there's a number of ways that I do this. Usually, I'll just kind of mark something out as kind of a, sketch something. It's like, okay, based on I've done a few of these, and so I kind of know that's roughly a nice height for that arc. And then I've got a lot of options now. One of them is, okay, that is 5/8. So that distance that I just marked out by just thinking of something. And this piece is 4 3/4 inch diameter. And so I put it in the handout that I gave to Jessica, that hopefully you'll all get or have already got or whatever. Y'all got it. Good. There's some math in there. I'm sorry. But, I've got a spreadsheet that I use, and I've got, okay, we're like that. Okay, I'll just tell you what this says. This says that if I've got a 4 3/4 inch diameter piece, and I want, what did I say, 5/8, that I would set up my bandsaw jig with a 4 3/4 inch radius. So when we get there, that'll make more sense. But I set up, I do that, and I say, okay, now that means that I could set that at a 4 3/4 inch radius, and I will come. So the math is all approximate. So I can set that up, and I'll come close to these points, but not exactly, because maybe the math says, oh, I really need a 4 1/8 or something, whatever. But I can't do that on my jig because I don't have holes for my, for there. So this process for me usually starts like this. I'll make some squiggles on my piece, and then I go over to the bandsaw. And I'll take this piece over to the bandsaw. We're going over here. So, 2019, at the Rocky Mountain Symposium, I saw a demonstration by John Beaver. So, johnbeaver.net is in the handout. John does this thing he calls wave bowls. So, he makes a bowl, and he cuts a shape that looks remarkably like this. in the bowl, and then laminates that with another piece of wood, usually contrasting, so that his stuff looks really cool. He ends up with a bowl. I saw that demo and I thought, well, I'll never do that. But I did think, hey, that jig that he made to cut stuff on the bandsaw were really cool and really would be helpful. And so I'm pretty sure I wrote down in my notes from the symposium, make John's jig. And then, you know, I folded that up and it went in the cupboard when I got home, and I never did. A few years later, we had Emiliano Archival demo for our club virtually, and he did calabash bowls. And he showed how he put the peva in cracks in those bowls. And I'd been looking for, like, how do I do that? You know, I'd seen Pat's demo using the biscuit cutter, and that frightened the heck out of me, and so I wasn't going to do that. But anyway, so I've been looking for things to patch cracks in bowls, and so that demo really spoke to me, and I started doing that. And then one morning I woke up, and I thought, somehow that jig that John made and cutting slices through a bowl and repairing the cracks, like maybe I could repair a crack that I make instead of one that the tree made, right? I don't know how that all came together, but finally I went down to the shop and I built, this is part of a jig I built. If this looks like I threw it together with scraps in an afternoon, it's because I threw it together with scraps in an afternoon. But this is the crux of what I would encourage everybody to go home and make. Even if you don't come up with all the rest of it, this piece right here. So this is a platform with a vertical piece. I've got 3 1-inch holes in here just for different sized pieces, different heights. And there's a 1-inch 8 bolt through here. 1-inch 8 because you can go to a good hardware store and get a bolt that's got 1-inch 8 threads per inch, right? That lathe, and my lathe at home, is 1 1/4 inch 8. You can't get 1 1/4 inch 8 bolt very easily because the standard bolt size for 1 1/4 inch is 7 threads per inch. So why we have 8 on our lathes, I don't know. But a 1-inch bolt is fairly easy to find, and then a 1-inch to 1 1/4 inch thread adapter, spindle adapter, if you have 1 1/4 inch stuff. So this, by itself, will let you hold something that anything you can put on the lathe and a chuck or a faceplate, you can attach to this jig, and it holds it safely, and you can freehand stuff. So if you want to cut, ridges around the edge of your bowl, if you want to turn a goblet and then cut a piece off of it to make a scoop, right? You try cutting that by hand on the bandsaw, and it's dangerous. And I hope everybody knows why. It's because same thing, why Rick opens cans with his skew, is because the unsupported cut is the bane of all of us, right? So you try and cut something round on a bandsaw by hand, the blade is pushing down on the wood right here. It's round likes to roll. And so the blade will catch that piece and it'll roll. It'll take the blade with it because it rolls into the blade. And then you got to change your blade and probably your pants because it happens like that. And it is scary and it's frightening. And you probably have a blade stuck in your piece of wood that you can't get out. I've done that. And your fingers might be, it might be okay because if you get blood on the wood, it's hard to get out. So hope you don't cut yourself doing that. So anyway, but with the jig, just like this, you can freehand something through the bandsaw, and it's held firmly in your chuck. So this is really useful. Now I've got like what I consider version 3 of John's jig. John sells plans for his jigs. And I'd encourage you, if you want to make one, to support him because he bothered to put the plans together. And there's like 3 parts. There's that piece, which I have here. There's a bunch of extra stuff on this one. Don't worry about it yet. But in the bottom of this top piece is just a dado that's perpendicular to where the chuck is going to mount, or parallel to where the chuck's going to mount. There's a piece here that has a spline that runs in that dado slot and has some holes. And so this, when I have this affixed to the base, lets me adjust and get the bandsaw to cut right where I want it to, because I can adjust that back and forth. And it adjusts perpendicular to where the blade's going to cut, right? This base piece is really what a lot of you probably already have, is just a circle chuck cutting jig. So it's just a piece of plywood you can clamp to your bandsaw with dowel holes for dowels. I've got holes every 1/4 inch, from about 4 to about 11 inches here. So I can make a circle anywhere from 4-inch to 11-inch radius for that circle. And that happens. So if I were to take this piece of wood, take a block of wood, drill a 1/4 inch hole in it, plop it down on that dowel, I could cut a circle in that, right? If I attach this to it, I can cut a part of a circle through something that's mounted in the chuck. So you see how that's gonna, I gotta put this on here anyway. So we'll stick that on there. Somehow this is harder to thread on to get started than it is on the. I find this harder to get started straight than on the lathe, probably because I've done the lathe so many times. So now you see how that can go in and that'll cut, and it'll cut a circle through there. So my next step, after I've scribbled all over this piece, is I come here to the saw, and I know 2 things. One, so I have a bunch of lines on here, and I'm going to put this where I wanted it, which was, I said 4 3/4, didn't I? I did, 4 3/4. So I've set my dowel at 4 3/4 inch radius. And I've got lines on here through my various sets of holes. The miter slot on this bandsaw is a little goofy. And I know it's this bandsaw because I have 2 saws at home and they're both fine. 3 saws, if you count my table saw. So I know one thing. I've got a line drawn on here, right here, and I know that that's the bottom of my arc. That's this spot right here, because that's where the blade's going to enter, right? And so I can line that up right there. It's like, well, the blade's going to enter there. That's obviously where that cut's going to happen, right? The other thing I know is I know where that top part of that arc is going to be. And that is when this carriage is perpendicular to the saw blade. So I've got lines here that I can line this all up. I've got a line drawn all the way around all these pieces, so I can line everything up. But if I can convince this thing to go, there we go. There's going to be a little, there we got it. So if I bring that up, now I know where it's not going to happen right here. It's going to cut up here, right? But it's going to be when this thing is in this orientation, right? I'm going to be cutting up here. So I know where the top part of my cut is going to go. And so usually I'll line up one of my lines and then mark the other one, or I'll line up both of them, or I'll, sometimes I go back and forth. I'll get from the bandsaw to the lathe, to the bandsaw, to the lathe, marking things, erasing things, until I get it the way I want it.
That gig also, right now, it looks like you're gonna cut where the high point is on the center line of the turning. But you can bias that to one side and have the high point also.
Yeah, okay, so the question is, if I set this jig up so it's not really lined up with the saw blade, I could get a cut that was a little off. And I tried that, and the saw does not like cutting it like that. Because you're cutting around you're trying to basically, you're offset. So it's like if you were trying to make a straight cut and you were running it through, like that, it kind of has the same effect. And the blade likes to bind and wander. So I've tried it and I wasn't successful. Now I've got the blade I have at home is 1/4 inch. This one's an 1/8. Maybe this one would do it. But
Dead center, basically.
yeah, I like to line up the base of this jig so that the hole that I'm sitting in is right in line with the blade. I have not found that it makes a difference whether it's lined up with the front of the blade or the middle or the back. Right? So I usually line it up with the teeth just because why not? But I've done some tests and I really didn't see much difference. A narrow blade, not a lot of difference there, but so anyway, I can mark things out, when I'm on the lathe with my pencil and my eye and my brain. But when I get to the bandsaw and put this thing in the jig, I find out what's actually possible. Because I've only got so many things to choose from here. So that kind of goes back and forth and I fiddle with it. So the other things that I have to think about now. So I've got this piece where I can turn that, I can thread a chuck on the lathe like nothing, but I don't know. Yeah, it means that must be it. That must be it. Oh, I should turn around upside down or stand on my head or something. Yeah, okay. You're probably right. I'm probably on the wrong side of the bandsaw. Anyway, what I did here was I marked either side of the blade. Because I can't really mark down the middle of the blade. The blade's not very wide, but my pencil has some width and everything. So I mark either side of the blade. And so when I get back over here, I can draw a line like between those two marks. And I usually have to do this a couple of times because I go around and when I get back to where I started, I'm not where I started because the pencil has moved. But you work at it a little bit, you can get close enough. So now I know where I want, like rotationally, I know where I want the low spot and the high spot, right? So I know how I want this oriented on the jig. So some of the things I've done on that jig, you can see all the extra stuff. Instead of just a bolt on that jig, I have a shaft that was in my junk drawer. We all have old lathe shafts in our junk drawer, probably. Some of us do. I don't anymore because it's right here. But so I put a shaft on there because I care about the rotation of this thing and where it is. And like when I put it over there, I want to make sure, that level is level and everything. So I've got a shaft on there so I can spin it. Before I built that jig, I would just turn it in the chuck and that was good enough. But when you can build something else, why not, right? So now I know that on this piece, I want to put a butterfly or a pivot in right here. I want another one in over here and the other one here. No, that's not the spot. Oh, that line didn't go all the way around because this piece is not all the way around there. I want one here and I want one here. So the trick that some of you have picked up on, and maybe not everybody, but I cut the recesses for these peva before I slice it on the saw. And I actually make 2 cuts on the saw and pull out a slice. So this took me longer than you would think to figure out, but if you cut the recesses first and then you cut it apart, then when you reassemble it, your form doesn't change. That curvature is the same. The gap, your grain follows across the gap. And so that was, it's often the simplest things that are the most surprising when you discover them. It's like, oh, because I tried all kinds of things. And then it's like, oh, we just cut these first. So I'm going to cut in the peva first, then we'll slice piece on the saw and come back and reassemble it. Now, I'm not going to do this piece because I don't want to take time to cut 4 peva in here all the way. So I've got another piece where I've cut 3, and so we're going to do 1. I can do this with the piece, you know, in the chuck on the lathe like this. It's not a problem. But as I was already bringing all these other gadgets, I figure might as well. Might as well bring 1 more. So I've got a carving jig. Oh, I'm not sure I like that design. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, this is Trent's carving jig. I really like it because it's 1 handle and you can move it all you know, however you want. And it really helps because a lot of times when I'm cutting in peva, whether it's for something like this or for you know, repairing a crack in a bowl or something, that they're not always at a convenient spot for, you know, working on the, you know, in the lathe spindle. So just being able to set things up, you know, however I want it, so that I can conveniently get to it. I'm going to put it, I'll work right here. So I don't know if you can see that or not. This guy might, but anyway, so before I cut the peva, I need to think about a couple other things. So I'm going to make a slice through this piece, right? And remove some wood. I told you I was working here, didn't I? Yeah, I'm going to remove some wood. I kind of need to think about how much wood I'm going to remove. How big is the slice going to be? One of the things I like about these pieces is, as a hollow form, that slice just kind of gives you another view into that negative space inside. So you're not just looking from the top, you're looking in from the side. And if you hold it just right, you can see all the way through it. And you can see all the way through it where 2 of the slices kind of come together. So you get a little window through your hollow form. But if it's too big, it just overpowers the rest of the form. Right? You make a huge slice through this thing. And I could, but it just kind of overpowers the thing. So, you know, somewhere between nothing and subtle is probably where I like to go. So rule of thumb, I found a couple of rules of thumb I found. If I've got, like that other piece was 4 3/4 inches diameter. If I don't want to think about what I'm doing, I'll set my jig up at a 4 3/4 inch radius. So that's something that John Beaver said in his demo, that if the radius on your jig is the same as the diameter of your piece, it's pretty close to what you would probably choose. It's going to be a pleasing shape. I don't know why that works out, but it has, I just marked things on this one and it turned out that way. So, I've also found that something around a 1/4 inch for most forms, of basically this size, something around a 1/4 inch slice through the piece is about right. So now I've got other things to think about. I'm going to put some peva in here. And I got lots of options. I don't have many options on this piece because I've already chosen. All right. But we'll pretend that I haven't. I get my templates for the router that I'll show you in a second, and the butterfly patches, the peva from Mark Stebbins in Hawaii, bigislandengraving.com. That's in the handout. And Mark makes the templates and the peva that match just about perfectly. If you use the right router bit and router collar, it's just like you don't have to think about it. You can make your own. You can make your own templates. You can make your own butterfly patches. I don't bother. So I have patches anywhere from 0.5 up to 1.1 inches. So I've got 0.5, 0.7, 0.9, and 1.1 inches. And I'm looking at this, and this is teeny on this piece. This is ridiculous. So somewhere in between teeny and ridiculous is probably good. Most of the ones that I do that are like of about this size, I end up with about a 0.7 inch peva, which is this one. Is that what I did here? It sure is. Good deal. All right. So that's that's a 0.7 inch. And the way I figure, if I'm going to take a 1/4 inch slice out of it, and I've got roughly a 3/4 inch piece, a third of that piece is going to be engaged in the top part of the hollow form, and a third is going to be in the bottom, and a third will be in that gap where the slice is going to be. So that kind of works out. That's kind of a nice ratio there. So most of the pieces I end up doing, the 0.7 and the 0.9 end up being kind of my go-to. The 0.5 and the 1.1 are great for little cracks in a bowl or in a piece. The 1.1s I tend to use if I'm like bridging a bark inclusion or something, because they're big and they'll cover that gap. But for this, these kind of middle-sized ones are good. And so I'm thinking, while I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the extent of my arc, right? The top and the bottom. I'm thinking about the width of the cut. I'm thinking about how big are my peva going to be. I'm thinking about what wood do I want the peva, right? Do I want them contrasting? Like, so this is a walnut. I think the walnut looks really good contrasted with this light wood of this elm here. Or do I want something like, I had a maple one here. This big one is maple. Do I want something like that that might blend in and be a little more subtle? So there's way too many things to think about in this project. But what do you think? You think the walnut looks okay on that? I do too. Let's turn this over just to finalize the decision, because one of these is in the heartwood, and so that one's going to kind of disappear just a little bit. Not that much. It still stands out a little bit. Yeah. You mean the? Oh, well, it's in the heartwood because that's what's on this side of the holoform. Because there's too much of it. So actually that you can see this peva here. And there's the line between the heartwood and the sapwood. And it's the same thing on the other side. So that's heartwood goes almost 90 degrees, but not quite around, or 180 degrees around the piece. But just because of where that holoform came out of the log. But yeah, see, that's, something to think about before, while you're laying it out. That was something I was thinking about. And what I decided on this piece was that since that heartwood sapwood line is almost right through, I wanted these two kind of balanced on that. So there's not much else going on this piece figure wise. So I wanted one of my peva next to that hardwood sapwood line, and the other one is just like this one, balanced on the other side. So that's kind of the way I laid this one out, was I've got that heartwood sapwood line, so I tried to balance things around it. All right. So I've got this marked here that I want to put one of my butterfly patches here. I got a bin full of stuff over here. I'll drag some of it over to the lathe. And we'll do this first. So the templates all just look like, just look like this. Plexiglass or something with the hourglass butterfly cut out of the middle. I've drawn the crosshairs on here because it helps me line these things up. If you're just putting them across a crack that's going wherever, you might not care so much about alignment, but I kind of sometimes do. So I've drawn crosshairs on mine. And like I said, you can buy these from Mark on the Big Island, and they come pretty quick. Goes with that is I'm going to plug in my hot glue gun. All right. Goes with that is a router. This is a Porter cable trim router. It's the one that Mark recommends. Doesn't matter. Need a router. Smaller ones are better for this because you're kind of manhandling them a little bit on a small scale. So the smaller routers are good as long as you'll take the right size collar, the bushing, and put the right size bit in it. It's like 1/8 of an inch, whatever, down cutting, up cutting, I can never remember. Down cutting bit, I believe it is. I've got the bit down below my collar right now because the bits are a little fragile. They're carbide, they're a little bit brittle, they're just 1/8 of an inch, so they're teeny. And so I'm always careful to keep that bit protected. Always run the bit down below the collar when I set it down. So now this is a trim router. And what are trim routers made for? Basically cutting outlets in drywall, right? So they're not really purposed for this kind of detailed work. So you have to be a little bit careful with them. So a couple of things that I do. One is when I'm setting the depth on this, and I'll talk about how I get the right depth. But when I'm setting the depth, I always hold the router in the same way. I don't think it matters, how I do it, but as long as I do it the same way every time. And when I'm turning this depth wheel, I always turn the same direction and stop at my depth. Because there's just enough play in this that if I'm turning it the other way, like bringing the bit down instead of up or whatever, it matters. It changes that depth. So I'm always careful to do this very same thing. The other thing is that if you look at this, the bit is not quite centered in the collar. And I've tried fiddling with it and doing all kinds of things, and I could never get it. It just isn't. So for that, when I'm routing on this template, I just make sure that I hold the router in the same way all the time. So if I hold it with the cord going out that way, I'm going to hold it with the cord going out that way for all my cuts. If I have the cord facing towards me, I'll do that. Doesn't matter. Just do it the same way all the time. And that error from that bit being not centered will work itself out. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We're good. All right, so I hold the template on the piece with hot glue. Yeah,
You said you hold that router, with that offset, it's off center, so you're in the circle, right?
Yeah.
The bit's on one side.
yeah,
Offset should be always to the outer edge of your butterfly.
well, it should,
If you're on this,
no, you don't want to rotate it around.
you should be.
No, because then your butterfly will end up being either too big or too small. The hole will be either too big or too, if you keep it the same, it will follow that template around.
This won't be direct.
So what'll happen is if I hold the router in a certain way, I'll cut a butterfly and it'll be over here instead of in the middle. But if I rotate the router as I go, it'll be big all the way around or small all the way around. That make sense? Good. Yeah.
For years, but offset, like you said.
Yeah, so these little trim routers are just. And they're fine. You want to trade? Because you could try it. Okay, I spend more than that, so maybe that's my problem.
Yeah, this seems like it would be smaller because you're not compensating for that offset.
Yeah, we can talk about it later. All right, so I'm gonna take this template and I'm gonna hot glue it in place. Because hot glue is sticky and it's fast and it's easy, right? And so that's what I'm gonna use to stick this and hold it in place. Now it's on a curved surface, so I gotta be a little careful with that. So I've got wedges that I'll stick in and glue in place to take up that wobbly. And I've got various sized wedges depending on, what I'm doing. Amazingly, I brought the ones that fit for this piece. So the other thing I do is blue tape, painter's tape, because hot glue is kind of a pain to pull out of wood. Well, what it'll do is, it'll stick in the pores. Then you got hot glue in your pores. And people will tell me, and some of you are thinking it right now, that, denatured alcohol will get rid of the hot glue. Or you can put it in the freezer, get rid of hot glue. But if I'm doing, 4 or 6 or 8 of these at once around a piece, I don't want to be messing around with the hot glue, trying to get it off piece. The tape sticks well enough, the hot glue sticks well enough to the tape, and then it all comes apart. So I've got tape on the bottom of my template, and I've got tape on all my little wedgies, because I don't want to mess with it all. So I've got lines on here where I want this. Lines drawn around from when I had it in the bandsaw jig, and lines drawn down the axis of the piece so that I can line up my butterfly template, and hopefully the bandsaw will go right through that spot. So I put a blob of glue, a couple of blobs of glue on my template, and set it on there. And usually, sometimes, depending on the curvature of the piece, it doesn't really like to set. And that hot glue, just being in a big blob, doesn't set up very quick. But kind of sticky. But when I put the wedges in, some reason, when you actually like press the hot glue in, it cures pretty fast. So when it gets thin and squished between the wedge and the wood and the hollow form. All right, let's get this going. And yes, my lathe at home does have lines of hot glue down the backside. Sorry about your lathe, but it comes off really easily. Just put the lathe in the freezer, it'll come right off, no problem. All right, so that's on there. I want to make sure that it's solid, that it's stable, that it's not going to slide around on me. I also want to make sure that I don't have big globs of hot glue on top of the template, because this stuff is there's a string right here. It's just kind of messy. And I take my router, and the way I set, I keep forgetting to bring over all the things I need. The way I set my router bit depth is I hold the router up, I take a template, and I put it on. These are all the same thickness, so I didn't have to use that one. That's good because I forgot to do it. And I take one of the butterflies and I stack them up. And now I can see, as I advance my bit, there we are. Yeah, I can see how deep that bit goes. And then I've set there's a scale on this ring, and I've just set that to 0 for that depth. And I put some tape on here so it doesn't wander around on me. I want this bit not to be as deep as these peva. I want them, when I put them in, I want them to sit proud of the surface, because I want to be able to sand them down to the surface. And I'd rather sand it down to the surface than miss by a 32nd on the depth. So I'm a little bit shy of the full depth of the piece. Now I have to fudge that sometimes depending on how much curvature is in this piece. If it's really curved, I might not have a whole lot of depth on the corners. So there's some fudging that you can do after a while, but this piece doesn't have a lot of curvature. It's not too bad. There's not big gaps between the template and the wood down there. So that'll work. Oh yeah, so that's another thing. When I turn this hollow form, this has got about a 3/16 wall thickness. And I'm going maybe about 1/8 of an inch deep for these peva. The butterflies themselves are 0.2 inches thick. So I don't go all the way through. And the primary reason for that is I want a floor. I want a bottom on this hole for glue, so that butterfly sits down on something so that it's glued. The other reason is I don't want to have to get inside and sand off anything that's sticking out inside here. I noticed the peva on that one bowl goes all the way through, so you had to sand that down on the inside, which is a lot harder than sanding on the outside for some reason. So, and especially with hollow form, I've got, a 1-inch thing of sandpaper on my finger, and I'm going to sit here all day trying to do that. But the main reason is I want glue surface on the bottom of that piece, not just on its little edges. Okay, so now we can cut. I'm going to make, on this piece, I'm going to make 2 passes. So I've set my depth ring at 1/16. So that's a 1/16 of an inch shy of my final depth. So whatever that turns out to be. I don't want to go full depth right away. On harder woods, like walnut, sometimes ash, especially the heartwood of ash, other things. I might make 3 passes to get to the final depth, just because the bits are fragile, they don't like it. You're not gonna cut well all the way down all at once. So this is kind of soft elm, and so it's gonna make it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set my router in the hole. I don't want to plunge the router through the template. And you'd be surprised how hard, sometimes it's hard to find actually that spot where, there's some days that it's just, is that in there? It's in there, okay? Now, if I just set the router there, it's tipping on the end of the bit. No. So I'm going to tip the router over so the bit's in clear air, turn it on, and then plunge it in carefully. And then it's just following the template around. Now, the safest thing to do is to wait for the router to stop before you take it out. If you can't do that, then make sure you pull the router straight up out of the hole, right? I mean, it sounds simple, but the edges of these templates are kind of hard to repair. So, you zap them on the way. Now, this thing is all full of sawdust. So I'm going to get my air compressor here. Well, that worked. That worked. I brought a can of air, but this works so much better. That's great. Don't inhale. Well, that's what they say. Okay, so now I've gotten rid of all of that. I'm going to hold the router the way I always do. Advance to my full depth. Make sure I'm oriented in the same way. Was I that way? Well, that's why you guys are all here. Thank you. This is my orientation 50% of the time. So I'm not consistent, so I'm glad you guys were paying attention. So, or we could have seen one. Anyway, so again, tip the router. Follow the thing around. Now, there's enough sawdust in here that I was not following the template. I was following the sawdust, especially in the corners. So I always blow it out, and I missed a little on the inside. You got to follow around the outside of the template and then zigzag in the inside too, especially on the bigger ones. But I blow that out and I make one final pass at that same final depth so that hopefully the router will follow the template this time instead of the sawdust. Is this right? Okay, good. Okay, now we have Peva. And now we see why I like the tape. So that's done. And it peels off the tape really easily, even though I don't need to do that. Okay, now this recess I just cut, because I cut it with a router bit, and the router bit is round. The corners of this are round. The Peva that I use they're not square, but pointy corners, right? And because I like, you can buy Peva that have round corners that will just drop right in right there. But I like the look, the traditional look of the pointy corners. So I have to cut the corners out. It's really not that hard. It does help if you can see. So my safety glasses are 1.5 readers, and I can see pretty well to turn. But so I've got some number 3 readers here. You can get the magnifying loops and all that stuff, but $1.98 at the drugstore and you're good to go here. So I've got a X-Acto knife blade that's just a skew blade. So I could open a can with this. I think it's a number 19. if I remember right. So the way I cut these, I don't like jab at it like I would with a chisel. I'm going to take the blade, line it up along the edge, poke the corner in the bottom, and lift the blade until it's vertical. So very easy and very controlled. The one thing that you have to remember is just like your skew, this blade has a bevel. And it wants to cut in the direction of the bevel. So if I line my blade up, if I line the bevel up with the direction I want to cut, I'll get a cleaner corner out of there. So instead of lining the body of the blade with the piece, the bevel on the blade. So four corners, and especially in a nice cooperative material, it's really fairly easy to get these done. Sometimes the hardest part is there'll be just a little bit of something down in the very bottom of that corner that you kind of have to work at, break those fibers up. But for the most part, that's pretty straightforward. And I think personally, I prefer the look of the square cornered butterflies or peva, and I think it's worth just that few extra minutes on each one to make sure that that I can use them. So I always, before I do anything else, I check to make sure that they actually fit, because there's stuff in there that's hard to see that may be preventing the fit. The other thing I've done to these is I took just a little bit of 220 sandpaper on a block and I knocked the corners off, what's going to be the bottom corners down there. So if there's any fluff or something left in the bottom from the cut, there's a little space for it to go. So I did that already. So now let's see if this bandsaw is going to work. What do you think, Don? So okay, we have confidence from the back row.
Bill, it was messed with since we fixed it.
Yeah.
They saw the bits and the.
So, right, so the question is, does Big Island Engraving, where I get all this stuff, do they sell the bits? No, but they tell you what bit and collar to buy. There's some really good videos and online help on their website about, what bit and what collar to buy from MSCS or MCS, whatever the company is anymore. MSC, whatever. Anyway.
It's an acronym.
Some four-letter company, and so they'll do, they'll tell you what exactly to get. And this Porter cable is even the router that he recommends. So, all right. So now I want to make sure that I've got this piece. I've got several things I need to do. I want to make sure that this jig is all set up right. So first thing is I know that on here I wrote 4.5. So I better put this in the 4.5 inch hole right there. If I'm doing multiple of these, like in kind of an assembly line fashion, I do right on the piece, all the settings that I want. Usually I'll come over to the bandsaw and I'll get everything all set up and I go back and I cut the peva and I bring it back and I cut it and it's all one thing and I don't have to think about it. But let's see, where is this gonna go? Right there. So I want to get this lined up in two different ways. I want to make sure that I've got this. I'm going to set this up. I made a mark at home on here. Let's see how close that is. Not at all, okay? I better double, oh, well, that's because I don't have the jig. I have this set at the right place, right there. That turns out right, then I'm happier. Right on, okay. So in reality, I'm lining the blade up with the center of this peva. But I had a line that I drew when I was at home and I cut all these that should have been right, and it turns out it is, so. Yeah,
Cutting a 1/4 inch,
oh, yeah,
but you set it up in the middle.
I've set it up, yes, because the next step. So. I want to make sure now that I've got this thing level in here, right? I've got peva cut at certain places that are planned for the blade to go through the cut. So on this jig that I've got, I can spin it. On a simple jig, you just move the piece in the chuck or spin the bolt or whatever worked. I've also got a gauge that I made that tells me where the center line for this piece is. So this line is lined up with the center line of the chuck here, and so I can check that the piece is, that these are on center. I clamp that down. I've also got lines drawn all over this piece. So I can, if I don't have that, I can just come back a ways and sight down the line. So I drew lines on my holoform, long lines on here, so that I could have a chance to get it lined up right. And I'm usually making 3 or 4 checks at all of this, because once you cut it, it's hard to uncut it. So I've got this, I've got the jig set with the lined up on the, wait, we're at 4.5. I want to be on the 1/2 inch line. Oh, that wasn't right then. No, it was. Must have moved it. We'll just say that. So I've got the jig all set. Wrong. There we go. I want to clamp it down to the saw so it doesn't move. This piece that on the base that on my saw at home slides freely in the miter slot. 4 3/4 was the other one. I just pulled this one out of the oven, so it's a different piece. But it says 4.5 right here. And I've read that 2 or 3 times now in my head. So, okay, now to Marty's question, right? I want to cut not one cut down the center line, but I want to make 2 cuts and pull a slice out. So the way I go about that, where are we? Well, let me come over here. So what I'm going to do is with the jig set at the center line, if I want a 1/4 inch slice, I want to move from the center line, I want to move 1/8 of an inch one way and then 1/8 of an inch the other way. So I'm going to draw 2 lines on here, and I'll do them on this side. Oh, so I have cut the wrong side first, so the other side is not cuttable. I made a design modification where I was going to have a really narrow slot because I forgot to do this step and just cut right down the center line. This is one of those projects that if you get excited and get ahead of yourself, then it's more fun. Yeah, well, you know, that's it. The first few of these I did, it was like, man, I've done this hollow form and I've hollowed it all out and it's nice and I'm happy with it. Now I don't know, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna cut it all up. All right, so I've made two lines here that are 1/8 of an inch apart. And that's easy to do because I can just draw two lines right here. So now, if I take the jig and I slide it backwards, so two of the lines are, so the offset lines are lined up. I'm 1/8 of an inch one way. Go the other way, I'm 1/8 of an inch the other way. And then I always, so that's a real simple way to kind of get that offset measurement. And I always look a couple of times because yes, I want to cut the slice that's closer to the top before I cut the slice that's closer to the bottom, because it makes sense. Don't stick your finger inside. All right, let's see how this saw does. So I want to go slow. Give the blade a chance to cut. And at this point, if it doesn't cut where I think it's supposed to, oh well. Now I want to support the backside of this cut, but don't stick your finger in there, because there's still a blade in there. There's one. Yes, you can. I'll send you an email with my shop rates. Just kidding. Just kidding. All right, one more. And whew, barely. So the blade did wander a little bit at the end of the cut. Or I missed, because there's not much foothold for that peva, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Most people don't notice. Okay, so now I think to somebody's question, if you are doing this and you're having a hard time with your hollow forms, like you have trouble with that little nib down the bottom or whatever, guess what you could do now? You like to put finish or paint on the inside of your hollow form? Guess what you could do now? So there's the piece we took out. Yeah, you can put that in your wrap. Well, if I can get this piece glued up, we can put this one in your raffle, but. All right. So I'm going to, there's my tape and my pella. We're going to see if we can get this put together. Actually, I'm going to put this in the lathe because I can use the tailstock to help hold it up. Unplug this, we don't need that anymore. So usually, so the question is, do I sand the saw cut? Usually, the only thing I might do, if necessary, and this is pretty clean, is I might just clean the fuzz off. Because on the bottom side of the cut, usually there's a little fuzz there, so I'll clean that off. But I don't usually, with a small gap, I don't usually sand it because I don't want to risk really rounding over the corners or, changing the shape. Now, if I'm trying to do something that's got, that's going to end up with a big gap, I might do a little sanding in there depending on how the saw was behaving.
Top and bottom, and you wanna.
So there's a piece, I think the thing you're asking,
So is that cut freehand then?
no, so this piece, and you guys come and look at it if you need to. The way I did this was just like what I did there, except before I made the second cut, I rotated it a little bit. And then cut through, and so that left a cut that's got a wave, but the gap also has a wave in it. And figuring out where you can cut it so that it actually will meet or not collide. No, I've got another spreadsheet for that. So, all right. So the way I go about this is dry fitting. Well, that's way too far down. Get that in there. So there's, holding this together is a thing. It's an issue. We get some tape set out here. So I'm going to just dry fit all four of these pella in here. So the piece is where it needs to. There's one on the floor now. There we go. So the piece is where it needs to be, and the gap's right, and all of that. There we go. And tape. If you don't tape them, then when you turn it, they fall out. So gravity. Yes, very grave. So I don't really need to tape this one in because I'm going to glue it. Bottom one's coming untaped. This wood was very wet just the other day. I'm not surprised. All right. At home, I normally use Tide Bond, just wood glue. Put these in because, well, I trust it. Right? And I gotta loosen, there we go. And I use whatever that bottle is that's sitting on the shelf next to my. I don't think it really matters. Just wood glue, I think works better for this than anything. If I have a piece that's looking sketchy, or I don't have a lot of purchase in the where the peva are going, or something, I might use 2-part epoxy for these, just for gap filling or something, or if I feel like for some reason I need extra strength in the piece. But I know a lot of people that do butterfly patch repairs in pieces with CA glue. And I've used CA glue on several of these, and it seemed fine. And it cures a lot faster than either of the other two. Now, the one thing I do, oh, come on, there we go. Oh, man, when it rains, or one thing that does happen with the wood glue, oh, now I'm going to glue my fingers together. There we go. All right, let's get those. The one thing that does happen with the wood glue is you do get squeeze out. And so I don't want squeeze out because it looks ugly. So my trick is I'll try and be sparing with the wood glue, but I've got a dental tool that basically looks like a hockey stick. And so I'll glue the pieces in, and then while the glue's still wet, I'll just go in and get rid of all the squeeze out. Just drag it out from inside the crack, because I don't want to see that. And I've had people ask, well, you know, segmenters use this clear wood glue. You know, why don't you do that? It's because I don't want clear squeeze out in there. That's all there is to it. So, you know, I just don't want the squeeze out blobs in there. So just a little tool with a little hook on the end, you can get in there and squeeze those out. Now, the next step is to sand these off. And you're going to be looking at this and you're going to be tempted to get out your power sander, your drill, and your 80 grit and just go after it. And what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with possibly a flat spot across the gap where you really want that butterfly to follow the curve. Or you're going to end up with flat spots where the wood is softer than the pella. So a hard sanding block, firm, and by hand. And you can sand these down. And with the hard surface, it doesn't like dig in to where you don't want it to. And you can really feel that, oh yeah, I'm sanding that corner down. I'm sanding this piece, so you can really get it down to where you want it. This is 120. You know, I would use 80 if the 120 was taking too long. But, you know, I'm not real picky about it as long as I can get them down in a reasonable time without destroying the form that, as somebody pointed out, I spent time making, right? So that didn't take long. And we're almost out of time, so that's good. You need to, what do you mean by almost, Don? 4 minutes? Well, let's see if I can pull the bottom off of this piece in a couple minutes. I'm gonna spend 2 minutes getting the cone off my live center, aren't I? There we go. So just a friction check. Hold the bottom. Oh, I'm gonna have to try and get a tool rest in here. Is it gonna go? Oh man, you hold your mouth just right and it's fine. So I'm just gonna do a simple bottom on this piece. See if the lathe turns on. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, no, okay. So we got more than 4 minutes here, so. Nope,
Nope.
nope, it's 2:20. Never mind. Tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take this home. I'm gonna take the bottom off. And all I do is just turn the bottom off and cut a simple concave in it. And I'll give it to Pat on Thursday. And then you guys can have it for your raffle or fire pit or whatever it is that you do with these things. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here for questions or whatever. Oh. Oh. We go down.
Okay, the slice just broke. So our turning challenge will be some sort of hollow form with a decoration. I don't think it's reasonable to expect people to do these butterflies, but if you do, it'd be extra credit. And
I want to see pictures.
we have 4 people right now for cleanup crew. If anybody wants to stay around and help, please do. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, it's fine. Yes.